Max Thorne adjusted his custom-tailored Armani suit as he entered the gleaming lobby of Horizon Enterprises, the tech company he had built from scratch over the past decade. At 31 he was already worth north of $300 million, with a penthouse overlooking Central Park, a collection of vintage cars, and a reputation as one of the most eligible bachelors in New York City. His piercing blue eyes, square jaw, and the distinctive dimple on his left cheek had graced numerous magazine covers, and his signature platinum blonde hair was always perfectly styled. Yet behind the confident smile and firm handshakes, Max carried a deeply personal burden that few knew about. "Good morning, Mr. Thorne," chirped his assistant, Vivian, as she handed him his schedule for the day. "The board meeting starts in 20 minutes, and Dr. Peterson called again about rescheduling your annual checkup." Max waved his hand dismissively. "Tell Peterson I'll call him back. What's the latest on the Nexus merger?" He strode toward the elevator, barely breaking his stride as employees nodded respectfully in his wake. "The paperwork should be finalized by end of day," Vivian replied, struggling to keep up with his long strides. "And don't forget your lunch with Senator Williams at 1. The elevator doors closed, leaving Max alone with his thoughts. He leaned against the wall and exhaled slowly, allowing a momentary crack in his perfectly composed facade. 10 years ago, at the age of 21, his life had taken a devastating turn. Just as his first startup was gaining traction, he'd been diagnosed with testicular cancer. The aggressive treatment had saved his life but left him sterile. The doctors had been clear: having biological children would be impossible. That knowledge had shaped every relationship since, including the painful end of his engagement to Eliza 3 years ago. She'd wanted a family, something he could never give her. The elevator doors opened on the top floor, and Max stepped out, his public persona snapping back into place. "Let's make some money," he announced to the room of executives waiting for him, hiding his personal pain behind the mask of the ruthless business titan they all expected him to be. That evening, Max sat alone in his sleek penthouse, nursing a glass of 30-year-old scotch. The Nexus merger was complete, adding another $50 million to his net worth, yet he felt strangely hollow. His phone buzzed with messages from people wanting to congratulate him, invite him to exclusive parties, or pitch him their latest business ideas. He ignored them all. Instead, Max picked up the framed photo on his coffee table, himself as a 10-year-old boy standing next to his father at a Little League game. It was one of the few happy memories he had of his dad before the man left their family for his secretary and a new life in California. "I'll never abandon my kids like you did," Max had promised himself as a teenager. Now that promise seemed like a cruel joke given his condition. The next morning, Max decided to skip his driver and walk the 10 blocks to his office. The spring air felt fresh, and he needed to clear his head after another night of restless sleep. He stopped at his usual coffee shop, a small place called Brewers that somehow had survived the gentrification of the neighborhood, probably because Max had secretly bought the building years ago and kept the rent affordable for the owners who had always been kind to him before he was wealthy. "The usual Mr. Thorne?" asked Diane, the owner who insisted on serving him personally despite having a dozen employees. "Please, and I've told you 1,000 times to call me Max," he replied with a genuine smile that few people ever saw. As he waited for his coffee, Max noticed a commotion near the back of the shop. 2 boys who looked to be around 10 years old were arguing intensely over what appeared to be a handheld video game. Something about their animated gestures made him chuckle. He'd been just as passionate about his first Nintendo at that age. "Here you go, 1 black coffee with a shot of espresso," Diane said, handing him his drink. "And some peace and quiet would be nice, wouldn't it? Those 2 have been at it all morning." Max turned to get a better look at the boys. One was wearing a red baseball cap backward over his platinum blonde hair, while the other had the same color hair neatly combed to the side. They were clearly identical twins, with square jaws that hadn't yet lost their childish softness, and Max nearly dropped his coffee, distinctive dimples on their left cheeks. "Who are they?" Max asked, trying to keep his voice casual despite the sudden pounding of his heart. Diane sighed. "They're with Emily Winters, she's over there working on her laptop. Sweet woman, runs some sort of youth program for kids without parents. She brings different children here sometimes to give them a treat." Max barely heard her explanation. He was staring at the boys, cataloging the similarities: the shape of their eyebrows, the slight upturn of their noses, the way the one without the cap furrowed his brow in concentration. Exactly the same way Max did during difficult negotiations. It was like looking at childhood photos of himself, doubled. "Are you okay, Mr. Thorne? You look like you've seen a ghost." Diane's concerned voice broke through his stunned reverie. "I'm fine," he managed, though he felt anything but. Just remembered a meeting I'm late for. He left $100 bill on the counter and mumbled something about keeping the change. As he headed for the door, the boy in the red cap looked up and their eyes met. Piercing blue, identical to his own. The boy gave him a curious look before returning to his game, unaware that he had just upended Max Thorne's entire world. Outside, Max leaned against the building, his coffee forgotten. It was impossible. The doctors had been definitive about his infertility. Yet those boys, they couldn't be more than 10 years old, which would mean they were conceived before his cancer diagnosis. But how? And who was their mother? His mind raced back through his relationships during college, trying to remember anyone who might have disappeared suddenly, anyone who might have kept such a secret from him. Max pulled out his phone and called his assistant. "Vivian, clear my schedule for the day. Something's come up." He ended the call before she could question him and walked back to the coffee shop entrance. Through the window, he could see the woman Diane had pointed out, Emily Winters, now gathering the boys to leave. She was slender with warm brown eyes and chestnut hair, dressed simply in jeans and a cardigan. She wasn't familiar to him at all, which only deepened the mystery. Taking a deep breath, Max made a decision. He would follow them, find out where they lived, and then figure out how to approach the situation. It wasn't his usual methodical style. Maxwell Thorne typically had 5-year plans, not impromptu stalking missions. But nothing about this morning had been usual. As the trio exited the coffee shop, Max fell into step half a block behind them, his mind swimming with questions for which he had no answers. Max maintained a careful distance as he followed Emily and the twins through the bustling New York streets. The boys moved with boundless energy, darting ahead and then circling back when Emily called them. "Archer, Jackson. Stay where I can see you," she would call out with equal parts affection and exasperation. Max committed the names to memory, Archer and Jackson. His pulse quickened every time he got a clear view of their faces. The resemblance was undeniable. They eventually arrived at a modest community center in a working-class neighborhood far from Max's usual haunts. A weathered sign read Winters Youth Foundation above the entrance. Emily ushered the boys inside, greeting several other children and staff members with warm familiarity. Max lingered across the street, observing from behind designer sunglasses. After 15 minutes of internal debate, he crossed the street and entered the building. The interior was bright and cheerful despite the obvious budget constraints, walls covered with children's artwork, mismatched but clean furniture, and the sound of laughter echoing from various rooms. A receptionist looked up as Max approached, clearly surprised to see someone in a $3,000 suit in their humble establishment. "Can I help you?" she asked, taking in his appearance with undisguised curiosity. Max cleared his throat. "I'd like to speak with Emily Winters, please. Do you have an appointment?" "Ms. Winters is quite busy with our afternoon programs." "No, but it's important. Tell her it's about Archer and Jackson." The names felt strange on his tongue, names that could belong to sons he never knew he had. The receptionist gave him a suspicious look but picked up the phone. After a brief conversation, she pointed toward a hallway. "Second door on the right. She can give you 5 minutes." Max found Emily in a small office, surrounded by grant applications and children's case files. Up close, she was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps early 30s, with kind eyes that currently regarded him with cautious interest. "I'm Emily Winters," she said, extending her hand. "Tricia said you wanted to talk about the twins?" Max shook her hand. "Maxwell Thorne." He paused, waiting for recognition to flicker across her face at his well-known name, but there was none. Either she was an excellent actress or genuinely unfamiliar with New York's business elite. "And you are?" Emily prompted when he didn't continue. "I saw the boys at Brewer's this morning," Max began carefully. "I couldn't help but notice them because—" He hesitated, then decided on directness. "Because they look exactly like me. Exactly like I did at their age." Emily's expression shifted from polite interest to guarded concern. "I'm sorry, Mr. Thorne, but what exactly are you suggesting?" "I'm not entirely sure," Max admitted. "But the resemblance is too striking to be coincidental. Are they in foster care? Do you know anything about their biological parents?" Emily's posture stiffened. "Mr. Thorne, I respect the privacy of all the children in our programs. I can't discuss their personal information with a stranger who walks in off the street, regardless of any perceived resemblance." "I understand," Max said, though frustration began to build within him. "But this is important. 10 years ago, I was told I could never have children because of medical issues. If there's any possibility that these boys are somehow related to me, I need to know." Something in his voice, the raw emotion he rarely allowed himself to show, seemed to reach Emily. Her expression softened slightly. The twins have been in the system since they were infants. They've bounced between foster homes, but they've been with me for the past year. I'm their court-appointed guardian while we search for a permanent placement. She paused, studying his face. I suppose there is a resemblance. Do you have access to their birth certificates? Any information about their mother? Max pressed. Emily shook her head. Their case is complicated. There was minimal documentation when they entered the system. The birth mother's name is listed as Caroline Reed, but efforts to locate her have been unsuccessful. No father is listed. The name hit Max like a physical blow. Caroline Reed? He repeated, his voice barely audible. Caroline, his college girlfriend during sophomore and junior year at Yale. They'd been serious until she'd suddenly transferred to a university on the West Coast, ending things abruptly with a vague explanation about family problems. That was 11 years ago, which would align perfectly with the twins' age. Emily was watching him closely. You know that name? She stated rather than asked. Max nodded slowly. We dated in college. She disappeared from my life without much explanation. He ran a hand through his hair, mind racing. She never told me she was pregnant. Never gave me a chance to. He stopped, emotions threatening to overwhelm his carefully constructed composure. A small voice from the doorway interrupted the tense moment. Ms. Emily Jackson took my controller again. It was Archer, the twin with the neater hair. He froze when he saw Max, his blue eyes, Max's eyes, widening with recognition. Hey, you're the man from the coffee shop. Before either adult could respond, Jackson appeared behind his brother. I did not take it. You said I could have a turn. His indignant expression melted into curiosity as he spotted Max. Whoa, Arch, he looks like us. The boys entered the office, staring at Max with undisguised fascination. Max found himself frozen, unable to form words as he took in every detail of their faces. They were identical twins, yet now he could see subtle differences. Jackson was slightly more assertive, with a mischievous glint in his eye that reminded Max of himself as a child, always testing boundaries. Archer seemed more thoughtful, observant, attributes that had served Max well in business. Boys, Emily said gently, this is Mr. Thorne. He was just leaving. Actually, Max said, finding his voice, I'd like to stay if that's all right. Maybe get to know the boys a bit. He looked at Emily with an expression that was part plea, part determination. Emily hesitated, clearly torn between protocol and the extraordinary situation unfolding before her. That's not how things normally work, Mr. Thorne. Please call me Max, he said, then knelt down to the twins' eye level. I'm Max. I like your hat, Jackson. He nodded toward the red baseball cap. Jackson grinned proudly. It's a Yankees cap. Do you like baseball? I used to play, Max replied, his throat tight with emotion. Second base. I play second base too. Jackson exclaimed, his excitement palpable. I prefer reading, Archer interjected, not to be outdone. And science? I won the science fair at school with my volcano project. That's impressive, Max said sincerely. I was always more into computers at your age. Built my first one when I was 12. You can build computers? Archer's eyes lit up. Could you teach me? Before Max could answer, Emily stepped forward. Boys, Mr. Thorne, Max, is very busy. And you two have homework to finish before dinner. The twins groaned in unison but dutifully turned to leave. Jackson paused at the door. Are you coming back tomorrow? He asked Max, hope evident in his voice. Max looked to Emily, who gave a small, reluctant nod. Yes, he told Jackson. I'll be back tomorrow. After the boys left, an uncomfortable silence filled the office. Max cleared his throat. I want a DNA test, he said quietly. If they're mine, and I believe they are, I have rights. Emily's professional demeanor returned. If you're serious about this, Mr. Thorne, we'll need to go through proper legal channels. These boys have been through enough disruption in their young lives. I won't allow anyone to enter their world only to disappear again when things get complicated. I would never, Max began hotly, then stopped himself. I understand your concern. But I need to know the truth. And if they are my sons, I want to be part of their lives. Emily studied him for a long moment. The boys need stability, not false hope. They've had enough disappointment. Her voice softened. But they also deserve to know where they come from, if possible. I'll help facilitate a DNA test, but I want your word that you'll proceed with their best interests at heart, regardless of the outcome. You have my word, Max promised, his businessman's mask completely gone, replaced by raw sincerity. As he left the community center, his mind was already mapping out next steps. He would need his lawyer, but discretion was paramount. The last thing he wanted was tabloid headlines about the CEO's secret love children. His phone buzzed incessantly with messages from Vivian about missed meetings and concerned board members, but for once, Maxwell Thorne had priorities beyond Horizon Enterprises. Back in his penthouse that evening, Max dug through storage boxes until he found his old college yearbooks. There she was, Caroline Reed, smiling from a debate team photo. Dark hair, intelligent eyes, and a determined set to her jaw that had attracted him from their first meeting. They'd been together for nearly 2 years, talking about a future together. Then suddenly she was gone. A brief call, a vague explanation about family troubles requiring her to transfer schools, and that was it. He tried to contact her for weeks before eventually moving on, burying himself in his studies and then his first startup. Had she known she was pregnant when she left? Why hadn't she told him? Caroline had known about his difficult relationship with his own father. She knew how important family was to him. The thought that she had deliberately kept his sons from him kindled a slow-burning anger, but it was overshadowed by a more immediate feeling: hope. After years of believing he would never have children, he might have not just one son but 2. 10 years of their lives had already passed without him, but perhaps it wasn't too late. Max picked up his phone and called the most discreet private investigator in his contacts list. "I need you to find someone," he said when the call connected. "Caroline Reed. Last known location was Stanford University, about 11 years ago." He paused. "And I need it done yesterday." The next morning, Max arrived at the community center carrying 2 carefully chosen gifts: a beginner's computer building kit for Archer and a professional-grade baseball glove for Jackson. Emily met him at the entrance, her expression a mixture of resignation and cautious optimism. "They haven't stopped talking about you," she admitted. "I've never seen them this excited about a visitor before." "I brought them something," Max said, holding up the wrapped packages. A flicker of disapproval crossed Emily's face and he quickly added, "Nothing extravagant, I promise. Just based on their interests." Emily led him to a small activity room where the twins were waiting. Their faces lit up when they saw him, and for the first time in years, Max felt something unlock in his chest. A capacity for joy he thought had been permanently damaged by his cancer diagnosis and the life choices that followed. "You came back," Jackson exclaimed, rushing forward. Archer followed more cautiously, but his smile was just as bright. "I said I would, didn't I?" Max replied, setting down the gifts. "And I always keep my promises." As the boys eagerly unwrapped their presents, Max caught Emily watching him with an unreadable expression. In her eyes he recognized both hope and fear, the same emotions churning within his own heart as he took his first tentative steps toward becoming something he'd never thought possible: a father. Over the next 2 weeks, Max rearranged his entire life around visits to the Winters Youth Foundation. Board meetings were rescheduled, conference calls taken from his car, and major business decisions delegated to his executive team, all so he could spend afternoons with Archer and Jackson. Each day revealed new similarities that strengthened his conviction they were his sons. Jackson's competitive spirit and quick temper that mirrored his own, Archer's analytical mind and quiet determination, both boys' uncanny ability to solve complex puzzles that had manifested in Max at their age. Emily watched these interactions with growing acceptance, though she maintained a protective distance. "They're getting attached," she warned Max after a particularly joyful afternoon teaching the boys how to fly the professional drones he'd brought. "The DNA results aren't back yet. What happens if they're negative?" "They won't be," Max replied with certainty. "But even if they were, He paused, surprising himself with his next words. "I'd still want to be in their lives." "Is that crazy?" Emily's expression softened. "Not crazy. Just unexpected from someone like you." "Someone like me?" Max raised an eyebrow. "A CEO millionaire whose face is on business magazines," Emily clarified. "Men like you don't usually spend their free time at underfunded youth centers playing with foster kids." Max felt a flash of defensiveness but recognized the truth in her words. 2 weeks ago he wouldn't have imagined himself here either. "People can change," he said simply. "Yes," Emily agreed, her warm brown eyes studying him. "They can." Something shifted between them in that moment, a mutual recognition that transcended their different worlds. For the first time, Max saw Emily not just as the twins' guardian but as a woman of extraordinary compassion and strength. She'd dedicated her life to helping children others had forgotten, creating family where none existed. In her modest cardigan and practical shoes, she possessed a quiet dignity that made his wealth and status seem suddenly superficial. That evening, Max's private investigator called with news about Caroline Reed. She passed away 3 years ago, he reported solemnly. Cancer. Before that, she was living in Seattle, working as a pharmaceutical researcher. Max sat heavily on his sofa, emotions crashing through him in conflicting waves. Grief for a woman he'd once loved, anger that she'd kept his children from him, and guilt that he hadn't tried harder to find her after she disappeared. Any family? He asked, thinking of the boys. A mother in Arizona. Marion Reed. I've got her contact information. The next day Max called Marion Reed. The conversation was strained at first. She was suspicious of his sudden interest in her deceased daughter's life. But when Max explained about finding the twins and the pending DNA test, her tone changed. So you're the one, she said softly. Caroline never told me your name. You knew about the boys? Max asked, his grip tightening on the phone. Not until near the end, Marion admitted. Caroline kept so many secrets. She thought she was protecting everyone. Protecting us from what? Max demanded, struggling to keep frustration from his voice. There was a long pause. When Caroline found out she was pregnant, she was scared. You were both so young with your whole lives ahead of you. She didn't want to burden you, especially after she learned they were twins. That wasn't her decision to make, Max said sharply. No, Marion agreed quietly. It wasn't. But then something else happened. Caroline got involved in a research study, some experimental treatment her professor was developing. There were complications. She was told the babies might have health issues. Max's heart clenched. What kind of health issues? The doctors weren't sure. Something about potential neurological effects that might not manifest until later childhood. Caroline was devastated, blamed herself. She decided to give the twins up for adoption, started fresh somewhere they wouldn't inherit her mistake. But they seem perfectly healthy, Max said, thinking of the energetic boys he'd come to know. Yes, Marion confirmed with audible relief. When Caroline was diagnosed with cancer, she tried to find them. She wanted to make sure they were okay, that the experimental drug hadn't harmed them. That's when she discovered they were still in foster care, being monitored by doctors associated with the original research team. She was too sick by then to do anything about it. Max's mind raced, connecting dots between this new information and the twins' complicated case Emily had mentioned. Do you have any documentation about this research study? Names of doctors involved. I have Caroline's journals. She wrote everything down toward the end. I think she was hoping someone would eventually find the truth. I can send them to you. 3 days later, a package arrived containing 5 leather-bound journals and a flash drive. Max spent the entire night reading Caroline's increasingly desperate entries, his horror growing with each page. The research study had been unauthorized, using pregnant women as unwitting test subjects for a drug meant to enhance cognitive development in utero. When several pregnancies showed complications, the lead researcher, Dr. Victor Mercer, had covered it up, monitoring the children through the foster care system under the guise of special health assessments. Max slammed his fist against his desk. The twins hadn't been bouncing between foster homes by accident. They'd been kept in the system deliberately, treated as ongoing test subjects rather than children deserving a permanent home. No wonder their paperwork was complicated, as Emily had put it. The DNA results arrived the same day, 99.9% certainty that Max was the biological father of Archer and Jackson Reed. Armed with this confirmation and Caroline's damning journals, Max arranged an urgent meeting with his legal team. By evening, they had assembled a formidable case against Dr. Mercer and prepared custody paperwork. When Max arrived at the youth center the following day, Emily could immediately sense something had changed. The results? She asked quietly, leading him to her office. Max nodded, handing her the official report. They're mine. The words filled him with both joy and solemn responsibility. But there's more. He laid out Caroline's journals and explained everything he'd learned about Dr. Mercer's unethical study. Emily's face paled as she pieced together implications for the twins' care. Those quarterly health assessments they have to attend, I've always felt something was off about them. The boys hate going, but the court mandated them as a condition of their foster placement. It stops now, Max said firmly. My lawyers are already moving to expose Mercer and end his access to the boys. Emily nodded, then asked the question that had clearly been weighing on her mind. And what about custody? Max took a deep breath. I want my sons with me, he said honestly. But I know how disruptive another sudden change would be for them. They trust you, Emily. You're the most stable parent they've ever known. Her eyes widened slightly at his use of the word parent. I'm not going to swoop in and take them away, Max continued. I was thinking, a transition period. They could split time between my place and here, get used to the idea gradually. He hesitated. And I was hoping you'd help guide me. I know nothing about being a father. Relief flooded Emily's face, followed quickly by something warmer. That's very considerate. Most men in your position would simply exercise their legal rights and be done with it. I'm not most men, Max replied with a small smile. And they're not a business acquisition. They're my sons. The conversation with the twins was both easier and harder than Max had anticipated. They sat in the youth center's small garden, the boys unusually quiet as Max explained that he was their biological father. So, you're our real dad? Jackson asked, brow furrowed. Like for real? Yes, Max confirmed. I didn't know about you until I saw you at the coffee shop. Your mother and I were separated before she knew she was pregnant. Is she our real mom? Archer asked, his analytical mind piecing together the implications. Where is she? Max exchanged a glance with Emily, who nodded encouragingly. Her name was Caroline, he said gently. She was very smart and brave. But she passed away a few years ago. The boys absorbed this in silence. Then Archer asked the question Max had been dreading. Are you going to take us away from Miss Emily? No, Max assured them. But I would like you both to come stay with me sometimes if you want to. We could get to know each other better. Jackson's face lit up. Like at your house? Do you have a pool? Richie at school has a pool at his dad's house. Max couldn't help but smile. Yes, there's a pool in my building. And plenty of room for both of you to have your own bedrooms. The excitement in the twins' eyes was tempered by uncertainty as they looked to Emily. She smiled reassuringly. I'll still see you all the time. Nothing changes except now you have more people who care about you. The next weekend, Max brought the boys to his penthouse for their first overnight stay. He'd spent a small fortune preparing rooms for them, trying to balance luxury with age-appropriate decor. Jackson's room featured a custom baseball-themed bed and an autograph collection of Yankees memorabilia, while Archer's contained a junior science lab and walls lined with books. This place is bigger than our whole school, Jackson exclaimed, running from room to room. Archer approached his exploration more methodically, examining the telescope on his balcony with quiet wonder. You can see the whole city from here, he whispered. That night, after an impromptu swimming session in the building's pool and pizza delivery, Max had intended to have his chef prepare something impressive, but quickly discovered the twins' culinary preferences were decidedly 10-year-old normal. Max tucked them into their new beds. As he was leaving Archer's room, the more reserved twin called him back. Are you going to be like Jason's dad? Archer asked, his voice small in the darkness. Who's Jason? Max asked, sitting on the edge of the bed. He's in our class. His dad gets him on weekends, but he's always on his phone doing business stuff. Then he gives Jason expensive presents so he won't bother him. The words hit Max like a physical blow. No, he said firmly. I won't be like that. I might make mistakes because this is all new to me, but I promise I will always make time for you and Jackson. Archer studied him with those two perceptive eyes. Okay, he said finally. Ms. Emily says you're different from what she expected. She says sometimes people surprise you in good ways. Does she? Max smiled, something warm unfurling in his chest. She's pretty smart. She likes you, Archer informed him matter-of-factly. She always fixes her hair before you come visit. Max chuckled, filing that information away. Get some sleep, buddy. Big day tomorrow. The following morning, while the boys were engrossed in the video game system Max had installed, his phone rang with an unknown number. It was a detective from the NYPD, informing him that Dr. Mercer had been arrested based on the evidence Max's legal team had provided. We found records of at least 12 other children in similar situations, the detective explained. This case is going to be huge. As Max processed this news, his executive assistant Vivian arrived unannounced at his penthouse, a stack of urgent contracts in hand. The board is getting restless, Max, she said, eyeing the scatter of toys across his usually immaculate living room with barely concealed horror. Mendoza is threatening to pull out of the deal unless you personally review the terms. Max was about to explain the extraordinary circumstances when Jackson barreled into the room, followed more cautiously by Archer. Dad. The game says we need another player for the racing tournament. Will you play? Jackson stopped short when he saw Vivian, his excitement dimming at her stern expression. Dad. The word sent a shock through Max's system. It was the first time either boy had called him that. He looked from the contracts in Vivian's hands to his son's expectant faces, and suddenly the choice seemed absurdly simple. Vivian, please inform the board that I'll be taking a 2-week leave of absence, effective immediately, he said, handing back the unsigned contracts. Family emergency. But the Mendoza deal, she protested. We'll still be there in 2 weeks, Max finished firmly. If not, we'll find another partner. Some things are more important than business. After a stunned Vivian departed, Max turned to his sons with a grin. Now, about that racing tournament. The next 2 weeks transformed Max's life and perspective in ways he couldn't have imagined. He taught the boys to swim properly, learned that Archer had an uncanny talent for chess, discovered Jackson's passion for cooking despite his limited palate, and found himself having conversations about everything from dinosaurs to the ethics of AI technology. Each day revealed new facets of his sons' personalities, and each night he found himself wondering how he had ever considered his life complete without them. Emily became a regular visitor, helping smooth the transition and offering guidance when Max found himself out of his depth with parenting challenges. One evening, after the boys had finally fallen asleep following an epic water balloon fight that had thoroughly soaked Max's designer patio furniture, he and Emily sat on his balcony sharing a bottle of wine. "You're good with them," she observed. "Better than I expected." "Thanks for the vote of confidence," Max replied dryly, but his smile took any sting from the words. "You know what I mean. Most men with your lifestyle wouldn't adapt so easily." Max gazed out at the city lights. "I've been thinking about my lifestyle a lot lately. The endless meetings, the constant deals, the networking events, none of it seems important anymore. Not compared to teaching Jackson how to throw a proper curveball or watching Archer's face when he solved that engineering puzzle." Emily studied him over the rim of her glass. "So what's next for the CEO millionaire?" "Retiring to become a full-time dad." "Not retiring," Max clarified, "but reprioritizing. I'm thinking about scaling back my direct involvement at Horizon, focusing more on strategic direction rather than day-to-day operations. And," he hesitated, "I'm considering moving to a house outside the city. Somewhere with a yard where the boys can play without scheduling an elevator reservation." "They'd like that," Emily said softly. Then, with careful casualness, "What about their care arrangement? Now that Dr. Mercer's study has been exposed, you have clear legal rights as their father." Max turned to face her directly. "Emily, you've been more of a parent to them than anyone. I would never cut you out of their lives." He took a deep breath. "Actually, I was hoping you might consider a more formal role in our unusual family situation." Her eyes widened. "What are you suggesting?" "I don't know exactly," Max admitted. "Co-parenting? Continued shared custody? I just know they need both of us." He reached across the table and took her hand. "And I've come to need you too, your perspective, your wisdom. The way you keep me grounded." Emily didn't pull away. "This is fast," she murmured. 2 weeks ago you were a stranger." 2 weeks ago I thought I could never have children," Max countered. "Life changes quickly. Sometimes for the worse, but sometimes." He squeezed her hand gently. "Sometimes for the better." The moment was interrupted by a small voice from the doorway. "Dad? Miss Emily?" It was Archer, clutching a stuffed dinosaur Max had bought him. "Jackson's having a bad dream again." They found Jackson thrashing in his bed, tears streaming down his face even in sleep. "No, don't take me back there," he whimpered. "Please, I want to stay." Max and Emily exchanged worried glances. The boys had mentioned similar nightmares before, fears of being sent away again, of losing their newfound stability. Emily sat on one side of the bed while Max took the other, both gently soothing the distressed child until he calmed. "We're here, buddy," Max whispered. "You're safe. No one's taking you anywhere. Promise?" Jackson asked sleepily, his hand clutching Max's. "Promise," Max and Emily said in unison. After Jackson had fallen back asleep, with Archer curled protectively beside his twin, Max and Emily returned to the balcony. "They still don't fully believe this is permanent," Emily said sadly. "Too many disappointments." "Then we'll have to show them," Max replied with determination. "Every day until they know without doubt that they have a real family now." Emily's eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "They deserve that." "So do you," Max said quietly. "You've given so much to so many children. When was the last time someone took care of you?" Before she could answer, Max's phone rang, his private investigator again. He answered with an apologetic glance toward Emily. The conversation was brief, but by the end, Max's expression had transformed from annoyance to shock. "What is it?" Emily asked when he hung up. Max ran a hand through his hair, his mind reeling. They found additional records from Mercer's study. There was another set of embryos created from Caroline's eggs and my genetic material, without either of our knowledge. Mercer kept detailed records of every aspect of his unauthorized research. "What happened to them?" Emily asked, horror evident in her voice. "They were implanted in another woman, a research assistant who thought she was participating in a legitimate fertility study." Max's voice cracked. "She gave birth to a baby girl 9 years ago." Emily gasped. "You have a daughter too?" Max nodded, still processing this staggering revelation. "Mercer's records indicate she was adopted by a couple in Connecticut. My investigator is tracking down details now." "My God," Emily whispered. "Just when I thought this couldn't get more complicated." Max stared out at the city skyline, his world shifting yet again. "I need to find her," he said softly. "Not to disrupt her life if she's happy, but just to know she's okay. And someday when they're ready, Archer and Jackson should know they have a sister." Emily reached across the table and took his hand, her touch grounding him amidst the emotional turbulence. "We'll figure it out," she promised. "Together." As the first light of dawn broke over the New York skyline, Max Thorne, CEO Millionaire and newly discovered father, felt his heart expand with equal parts fear and determination. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in his life he wasn't walking it alone. If you're enjoying this video and want more content like this, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell. That way you won't miss out on any of the amazing stories we have coming up. Your support really helps the channel grow and keeps us bringing you more of what you love. Thank you. 6 months later, Max stood in the backyard of his new home in Westchester County, watching as Archer and Jackson raced across the expansive lawn with their newly adopted puppy, a golden retriever named Rex. The sprawling colonial house behind him was a far cry from his sleek Manhattan penthouse, but the sound of children's laughter made it feel more like home than any place he'd ever lived. "They've come so far," Emily remarked, joining him on the patio with 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Max, their fingers brushing in a touch that had become comfortably familiar. "We all have," Max replied, gratitude evident in his voice. In half a year his entire life had transformed. He'd restructured Horizon Enterprises, appointing a new CEO while remaining as chairman of the board, giving him the flexibility to be present for his children. The boys were now officially in his custody, though Emily remained an integral part of their lives. More so since she'd accepted his offer to lead the Thorne Family Foundation, a new nonprofit dedicated to reforming the foster care system and supporting children affected by Dr. Mercer's unethical research. "Any news about Charlotte?" Emily asked gently, referring to Max's biological daughter who had been adopted by the Wrights, a loving couple in Greenwich. Max nodded. "I spoke with her parents again yesterday. They're open to arranging a playdate next month. Nothing overwhelming, just a chance for the kids to meet without the pressure of explaining everything right away." The Wrights had been understandably shocked when Max had first approached them with the truth about their daughter's biological origins, but to his immense relief, they had been remarkably understanding. Unlike the twins, Charlotte had been raised in a stable, loving home from infancy. Her adoption had been legitimate, her parents unaware of Dr. Mercer's unethical study. After the initial shock, they had cautiously agreed that knowing her biological father and brothers might someday be important for Charlotte's sense of identity. "One step at a time," Emily reminded him, squeezing his hand. "Just like we've done with the boys." Max smiled, watching as Jackson attempted to teach Rex to fetch while Archer meticulously constructed what appeared to be a miniature obstacle course using branches and lawn toys. The contrast between his old life of boardrooms and billion-dollar deals and this peaceful domestic scene sometimes still gave him whiplash, but he wouldn't trade a moment of it. "The hearing for Mercer's case is next week," Max said, his expression darkening momentarily. "My lawyers think he'll get at least 15 years. Too lenient for what he did, but at least his career is finished." Emily nodded soberly. "And the other children from his study?" "All identified and their families notified. The foundation is providing whatever support they need: medical care, counseling, educational assistance." Max ran a hand through his hair, a habit that emerged whenever he was processing complex emotions. "Some of them have health issues that may be related to Mercer's experimental drugs. Makes me all the more grateful that Archer and Jackson are healthy." Their conversation was interrupted as Jackson came bounding up the patio steps, his face flushed with excitement. "Dad. Miss Emily. Archer figured out how to make Rex jump through hoops. Come see. Max and Emily exchanged smiles and allowed themselves to be dragged across the lawn to witness the latest achievement. Archer beamed with pride as he demonstrated his training technique, the usually reserved boy blossoming under their attention. That evening, after tucking the exhausted boys into bed in their dinosaur and space-themed rooms, Max joined Emily in the kitchen where she was reviewing grant proposals for the foundation. "I've been thinking," Max said, sliding a steaming mug of tea toward her. He'd learned months ago that she preferred tea to wine in the evenings. "A dangerous pastime," Emily teased, setting aside her paperwork. "Funny," Max retorted with a smile. "Seriously though, I've been thinking about us, this unusual family we've created. The boys are thriving with our arrangement, but I wonder if we could make it more official." Emily's eyebrow raised. "Maxwell Thorne, if that's your idea of a proposal, your reputation as a smooth negotiator is seriously overrated." Max laughed, then surprised her by pulling a small velvet box from his pocket. "I had something more traditional in mind actually. Though I admit none of this has been traditional from the start." He opened the box to reveal a stunning yet understated emerald ring. He'd learned enough about Emily to know that flashy diamonds weren't her style. "I'm not asking because of the boys though they adore you," Max continued, his voice softening. "I'm asking because somewhere between discovering I was a father and rebuilding my entire life around that fact, I fell in love with the woman who taught me what truly matters. The woman who challenges me, grounds me, and makes me better every day." Emily's eyes glistened with tears as Max knelt before her. "Emily Winters, will you marry me? Not just to co-parent our extraordinary boys, but to build a life together that neither of us imagined 6 months ago." Emily's answer was interrupted by 2 small gasps from the doorway. Archer and Jackson stood in their pajamas, eyes wide with surprise and matching grins spreading across their faces. "Are you going to be our mom for real?" Jackson blurted out. Emily laughed through her tears. "Well, I haven't actually answered yet." "Please say yes," Archer added quietly. "Dad's happier when you're here. We all are." Emily looked from the hopeful faces of the boys to Max's expectant expression. "Yes," she said simply. "To all of it, being your wife, being their mom, to this crazy, wonderful life we've stumbled into." As the boys erupted in cheers and rushed forward for a group hug, Max felt a completeness he'd never thought possible. From believing he was infertile and destined to be alone, to discovering a ready-made family that needed him as much as he needed them, his journey had come full circle. 1 month later, as Charlotte shyly joined their family gathering for the first time, tentatively getting to know the brothers who shared her distinctive blue eyes and platinum blonde hair, Max reflected on how quickly life could change, how a chance encounter in a coffee shop had led to healing deep wounds he hadn't even fully acknowledged. He had spent years building a business empire, accumulating wealth and status, all while carrying the hidden pain of believing he could never have a family of his own. Now he understood that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts or company valuations, but in the bonds that connected one heart to another, in the trust reflected in his children's eyes, and in the love he shared with a woman who valued character over currency. The CEO millionaire who once thought he was infertile had discovered that family, in all its messy, complicated, beautiful forms, was the greatest fortune of all. And unlike the wealth he had accumulated, this was a treasure that only grew when shared, multiplying with each moment of connection, each act of care, each choice to put relationships above ambition. As Max watched his expanded family together, biological children and chosen family alike, he realized that sometimes life's most precious gifts arrive in unexpected packages, and that being open to those surprises might just be the secret to true happiness. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to leave a comment below sharing your thoughts. We'd love to hear what you think about Max's journey and if you'd like to see more stories like this. You can also support us through Super Thanks here on YouTube. And don't forget to share this video with someone who might enjoy it too. Your support helps us create more content just like this. Thank you for watching.